Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Today, I'm thrilled to have a true expert in the field of commercial real estate, Mr. Colin Carr. He's with me as my guest, and he's the founder and CEO of Carr, C-A-R-R, the nation's leading provider of commercial real estate services for healthcare tenants and buyers. Every year, thousands of healthcare practices trust Carr to help them achieve the most favorable terms on their lease and purchase negotiations. Colin has been in commercial real estate for over 2 decades and has personally been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. He offers a wealth of insight, and I'm really looking forward to picking his brain in an effort to help the listeners of the Doc platform better and more effectively navigate the world of commercial real estate and, as a result, grow their net worth. Before we start, I do want to say that the content of this episode is for general information purposes only and is not intended for any legal, financial, or personal advice directly for your particular situation. Please consult the appropriate professionals for that information. So with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Colin Carr to the show. Welcome, Colin.
Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you. Thanks for appearing on the Doc Podcast. And one of the things I like to do, the release of your episode is going to kind of follow after a pretty intense series of clinical side and the didactic side on early expansion and early treatment and growth and development of the craniofacial complex. And I like to mix it up and talk about not just the clinical side, but the business side and the real world side outside of that, because at the end of the day, anybody who's out there practicing is in business. And if you're in business, you need a physical space to operate your business. And that means real estate. And so this is such a misunderstood area. And I want to really kind of dive in with you on some of the topics of not just the general of, rent versus buy or the pros and cons, which we will talk about. But I want to get a little more granular too throughout the episode today and really talk about the why behind a lot of this and maybe some examples of specific situations that you can add.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, I can start with the why for you. And I'll tie it into my story. I'll keep it brief, but I got into real estate when I was 19 years old. I started just kind of down and dirty, managing apartment complexes in a college town back in Michigan.
Oh, cool.
Moved to Colorado in my early 20s and went back into property management or kept going in property management. And that's where I cut my teeth on, working with contractors and architects and owners and got a really great introduction to real estate. It was mostly multifamily, but it was a great way to enter in. Got my broker's license when I was 22 and started working for a guy that did mostly large national retail work. So he did Walmart, Wendy's, Blockbuster. And what I mean by that is he was their broker. He was their advisor. And so I got to see at a very high level early on what it looked like to represent some of the largest and most successful companies in the world. And did that for a couple of years. Later moved into more of a generalist role where I was doing office, industrial, retail. I was very hungry. And so if it moved, I chased it. And that gave me great exposure to all these different areas of commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. And after being involved in real estate for a number of years, and I'd been involved in hundreds of transactions, I got my first introduction to medical real estate. Okay. And I was asked to lease or list a property for an investor that I had done work for. He bought a Class A medical building. And so I started listing the property. And a number of doctors started calling on the property, and they'd show up by themselves, and they'd show up in their scrubs, or they'd show up and say, "Hey, I just finished patients. Like I need to get back and see more patients." But yep. They would just show up and I've got a half an hour look at this property, and I would ask them questions, and they had no answer. Like they didn't understand what they were truly looking for. They didn't understand what they were coming from. They didn't understand the financial aspects. They had no clue what it meant to negotiate a really favorable deal. Mm-hmm. And I just had a number of interactions where it made me realize very quickly these are incredibly intelligent people, and the vast majority truly care about their communities and about people. That's why they went into healthcare. But they were lacking a very obvious skill set that had just astronomical impact on their practice. The location, the ergonomics and flow of the space the quality of property as far as like parking or signage, visibility, all these things that play into the patient experience. And then you get into the economics, and it's very obvious that they were lacking a lot of help. And so number of those scenarios happened, and then I had a couple specific ones that really just tipped the scale for me to where I knew it was time to do something different. I was listing a set of medical buildings for a publicly traded REIT. It's now the largest REIT in the world,
Mhm.
and I had a couple renewals I was working on, and I had a new deal I was working on. And I remember getting on the phone with an asset manager out of Scottsdale for this REIT, and he said, let's talk about Dr. So-and-so's lease renewal coming up. Very successful plastic surgery practice. And he said, does he have a broker? Because I'd met with him. He said, does he have a broker? And I said, no. Does he know the market? And I'd say, he might say he does, but no, like I talked to him, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. And then he said to me, is he willing to move? And I said, no. He told me flat out that he doesn't have the time or the money to move right now. And so the landlord goes, all right, go back to him at this lease rate. And the lease rate he said to go back to him at was literally $7 a foot above what we were marketing new space at the property. $7 a foot. And on top of that, the guy had a full service lease, which, not to get too technical, but he had a base year, meaning he was getting all these expenses pushed back to his lease when they would reconcile the expenses every year. And so literally he was like $7 a foot above market as far as the base rent, but there was another couple dollars a square foot getting pushed back into the lease that he wasn't aware of and didn't understand if that was not standard or standard. The asset manager goes, go back to him at this number. And I said to him, I said, that's literally going to be a couple $100,000 above our ask rate over like the next 5 years alone.
Yeah.
And I said, are you going to give him any free rent? He's like, no. Are you going to offer him any build out allowance or renovation allowance? The space is kind of tired, needs it. He's like, nope. And I asked him a number of questions, and he goes, Colin, do you work for him or for me? And I'm like, I work for you, but I'm like, this is just one of the most above market deals I've ever been a part of in my entire life. Like,
Wow.
and he goes, Colin, get the job done or I'll find someone who will. And he hung the phone up on me. And so
Wow.
I mean, but again, I work on my fiduciary legally. I have a legal fiduciary to that party, the landlord. And so I went back to the doctor. I sent him the proposal. He kicked a little bit and said, well, can't you do this and that? And I just said, no, sorry, it's a take it or leave it. And I've got marching orders from the landlord. If it doesn't work, we wish you the best. And he literally signed it. And so I had that scenario happen. And so somebody might say, well, good job for you because you won and so forth. And I had no other option legally besides take care of my client. It was a legal transaction. But I walked away from that. I'm like, that didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And so I could get really technical now. And I'll say this, look, it's a legal fight. And before anyone wants to, find the address of that landlord and send them a letter, let me just ask this question to anyone who's listening. If you were selling your house, would you want the highest price or would you want a fair? You want the highest price.
Right.
You don't care if it's worth $1 million. If you get $1.3 million, you're selling it for $1.3 million.
Right.
And the market crashes tomorrow, you're not sending a $300,000 refund check to the buyer. You're going to say, look, if the buyer wanted representation, they should have had it. If they didn't want to buy the house, they shouldn't have bought the house. And that's exactly the way that the landlords think. If you don't want to lease the space at this rate, then go somewhere else or get a broker who can negotiate for you. So, all right, all that to be said, I had a couple very similar scenarios happen, like nearly identical.
I was going to say, so that's pretty standard. That's not like a one-off that it was just this is kind of industry standard, what's happening on the landlord side.
No. And again, I flip it over. Like, again, take any commodity that you can purchase. Like every person who goes to a car dealership to buy a car says, well, would you take this? Like they don't care. And they wouldn't care truthfully if that dealer lost money. Like let's say the car cost 60,000. They'd say, would you take 55? If the dealer said, we'll take 55, but just so you know, we're going to lose $3,000. Almost every person's going to say, well, if you're willing to sell it, I'll take it at that.
Right. Now, let me pay you that 3,000. Yeah, exactly. You're gonna even if people say they would, when push comes to shove, I don't think many would. I agree with you.
No, they don't. And I mean, I've sold houses before and I do commercial real estate, but I usually hire someone to sell my houses. I'll buy them myself, but I hire a residential broker to help me list it and do the best job to market it. That's wisdom, to use the most qualified people. And the last couple of houses I've sold, like they bring me these numbers and I've looked at them. I said, look, is this you trying to get a listing right now and you're trying to sell me on this? And they're like, if I don't get you an offer and we're not under contract in 2 weeks, then fire me at this number. And I'm like, all right, well, last 2 houses I've sold, the numbers they've sold it at were crazy. And yet I'm I'm happy to take the money. And
Mhm.
my natural response is you wouldn't buy it if it wasn't worth it to you. You
Mhm.
know, again,
Right.
what is worth its value to you, or it's the price you're willing to pay. So anyway, so I had a couple of those scenarios happen. And then after that, I just said, you know what? I really feel like the healthcare community is underserved. A lot
Mhm.
of people are landlord brokers for medical systems, hospital systems, dentists and vets, et cetera, but they're not actually on the doctor side. They'll list the property, but they don't want to run around with the doctors helping them renegotiate leases, et cetera. So
Right.
I started our company, Carr, in 2009, the beginning of it. And, today, to just over 15 years later, we're now licensed in all 50 states
Mhm.
plus DC. We have over 5,500 clients that we're doing work for coast to
Wow.
coast, and everything from the small startup practice to groups that have literally 100 plus locations and everything in between.
Mhm.
Lease renewals, relocations, scaling, purchases, land, anything with real estate for your practice, we handle it, and we don't cross over to the landlord seller side, so it's a no conflicts of interest approach. And this is the obvious approach you would take in any other format. If you were being audited by the IRS, you wouldn't ask the investigator for their thoughts. You'd have a good
Mhm.
CPA or tax attorney. If you got sued or someone was threatening a claim against you, you wouldn't ask the prosecuting attorney to give you advice. You'd get a defense attorney. I mean, it's very obvious. You need to have independent, protection, advice, et cetera. So that's what we do. We just hit one side of the negotiation, and it's been a blast. It's been 15 years, and we're as happy as we've ever been.
That's awesome, and good for you for seeing a problem. I mean, obviously, you seized on an opportunity, which that's what we all do in business and our professions, right? In a good way, but you seized on it to help out a sector that was, as you said, underserved, undereducated. I can completely attest to that, right? I've went through many years of school, for being orthodontist. It's 11 years after high school. I did it continuously. I've always said I never took one business class my whole entire time in school. Certainly nothing on real estate. The post grad education, there's just so much science to learn. There's so much intensity in the didactic arena. And I've talked to, looking back, I've talked to directors, and since I've been on faculty at multiple institutions, I've even talked to higher ups within programs and said, can we introduce some of this? And they're just like, there's just not time or a place. And the accreditation agencies don't require it. So there's really no incentive to detract from the things that they need to, provide, that they perceive as those needs. So we don't learn about whether it's insurance, again, very important things like insurance, cash flow, money management, practice management, and an admin, and real estate. And so you're kind of on your own. And I know for me, my particular situation, I was very fortunate to have a dear family friend who has passed, who's was a corporate attorney who was just a whiz in this area, and I had that sounding board to ask a lot of questions to. And my wife and I really decided from the beginning. We started subletting a little space from another practitioner in the town I wanted to practice in, and then about within a year, the practice really started to grow. I'd started it from scratch, and it was starting to outgrow the space. And so I found a building. I really had it as my vision to want to buy and own my real estate. I understood from reading things, whether it's starting at a level like Rich Dad Poor Dad or Ink and Grow Rich, right? There's all these great resources out there, and I'd love you to offer some more to help what you think could educate the docs in this arena. But it really is incumbent upon the doctor to do their own due diligence and understand this. But then, even with that, if you don't have the right representation, you're going up against people who know so much. The deck is stacked against you. There's no way, no matter how much you read or educate, which again, I'm a big believer you need to do to be an educated consumer if you're going to go into this real estate game. You still have to rely on professionals that you can trust to be your advocates and to be there to support you in these transactions, because we are in between patients and running around and managing our businesses, trying to run there after patients to check out a building. And when you were telling the story, I'm laughing because when I went to go see the building I bought, literally I finished with patients at the place I was, and my wife and I rushed right over to see the building and walk through. So it's exactly how it happened. So before we get into kind of the stages of the transaction, because I want to walk people through that. What are some of the things that you recommend that doctors of any age who are practicing, whether renting or buying or planning to buy or already own, what can they do to help better educate themselves as to this, just to navigate this space? Hey, everybody, be sure to check out the Doc website where you can get access to tons of great information, including free educational content, access to private one-on-one coaching with me, ADA CERP recognized CE courses, and amazing patient testimonials. Just go to theorthocoach.com. That's theorthocoach.com. And now back to today's episode.
Okay, so I can talk about like generalities as far as there's websites where you can get educated on just commercial real estate terminology, like glossary terms, like what's a triple net lease versus a full service lease. Our website has just a plethora of resources, so we can talk about that later. Give the link.
I'll put a link to that in the show. Yeah,
You've got hundreds of glossary terms, FAQ terms, and they're really valid questions like, why would my landlord not do this in this scenario? Or it's the most obvious questions we get asked every day. And so there's a lot of resources like that. But the number one way that you become a market expert and you ensure that you don't choose the wrong property, that you don't overpay, is number one, you hire an expert agent that represents your interests. So you don't hire a residential broker for a commercial deal. You don't hire a landlord broker that gets 90% of their income from landlord. You hire a true tenant representative broker or agent. And then, so there's no conflicts of interest. And then the education process happens when they take you to market. And so what it looks like if you have a really good broker, and this is this exact same process that Walmart does, that Starbucks, that Chipotle. So pick any large national retailer or pick any Fortune 500 company. They all have the exact same game plan. It's really simple. They hire an expert agent, not somebody internal, not the office administrator, not an attorney. They hire somebody that's a market expert who lives and breathes it every day, drives around every day, talks to people every day. And then what they do is they get your criteria of, hey, I need 3,000 feet. I'm open to owning, leasing, et cetera. I'm open to retailer office. And then they take you to the market and they show you all your options.
Okay.
And you might lean ahead of time. Like it sounds like you lean towards purchasing. I lean towards purchasing, but purchasing is not always the best option. It might, you might have an option to purchase and it's a dramatically inferior location, quality of property, accessibility. And so again, that's where you triple over a dollar to pick up a dime concept. Is you don't fall in love with one property. Don't predetermine if it has to be retail or office. Don't predetermine if it has to be leasing versus purchasing or retail office or whatever the property type might be. And go in there and say, educate me on the market. Show me all my top options. And we're not talking about looking at 30 properties and taking like 2 weeks. We're talking about an hour and a half to 2 hour tour where someone goes and they pull all 20, 30 properties or 10 or whatever there might be. They whittle them down based upon your criteria. They pre-qualify those landlords or those sellers to make sure that, can you even do healthcare there? Is it an allowed use for zoning? Does it have the parking? Is it going to be a good location? Is there a good synergy? You're not going to show an orthodontist a space where there's like a marijuana dispensary next door. Again, you do all the pre-qualification and all the due diligence. And then when you as the doctor go to the market and you look at the top, like let's say 6, 7 properties that came as the top, pre-qualified options from a list of 20, and then you look at leasing, purchasing, retail office, that's how you become educated. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter what's happening in Ohio or Los Angeles, like what's happening in your market where you want to be. All of a sudden, you now have seen the best properties. So that's step 2, 3, or 4 in the list we're giving. The next thing you do is, unlike residential real estate, where when you find a property and you submit an offer, it's a legally binding contract, and the seller says yes, and they sign it, you're under contract, you're in a legal contract, and you typically have objection deadlines you can get out, but it's a contract. In commercial real estate, you typically negotiate on a non-binding letter of intent, even if it's a purchase. And so you submit these offers to these 3 or 4 landlords or sellers, and it's very common to go 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation. And again, that's foreign to people that have been through a residential transaction. But the reason being is there's too many moving pieces and parts to the transaction. It's not just on a lease, not just like what's the lease rate. It's how many square feet, what's the length of the lease, how much build out period you need, how much free rent are you asking for, how much money is the landlord going to contribute, what are the annual increases. Do you want an exclusive for just orthodontics? Or are you asking for all dentistry? What are your options to sublease or assign it if you sell the practice? Is there a death and disability clause? And so you get into all these different areas. and you're pulling levers. And so if you ask for a year and a half of free rent, you're not going to get the same build out allowance, or you might pay a higher lease rate once that free rent expires. And so you're pulling levers with 3 or 4 landlords. And then I'll
And if I
bring
interrupt
this
you for a
part.
quick second with that, are
Yeah.
you pulling those levers at that point? So well, two parts. One, finding a tenant representative broker. First, start on that part. Is that something that, I mean, can you just Google that in your area for someone who doesn't know? Is that what I mean, obviously there's your firm as well, but if someone doesn't know of it, or they're in an area that they, don't know even where to begin, is that where they would start?
Yeah. So great question. There's really a couple ways you can go about it. Number one, yes, you can just get on Google, search online, and search like tenant rep, healthcare broker, or dental real estate broker, what have you.
Okay.
And then you're going to get people that are sponsoring sites that are not. You're going to get people that are doing Google AdWords. So you do have to sift through it a little bit. And
Okay.
then once you find a couple people, then call them and ask them questions like, how much of your work is tenant work versus landlord work?
Oh, this is great.
How
Actually,
many
yeah.
healthcare
Can you go through
providers?
let's go through. So how much is tenant work versus landlord work? Okay. So you
Yep.
want to find someone that is airing towards tenant work, obviously.
Absolutely. Yep. If you
Okay.
can find someone who's exclusive, that's the best. It's kind of like this. If you're going to hire an attorney to help you, like with a family law issue, like
Hmm.
you don't want a real estate attorney. It's like, well, how many families are you helping with like legal issues right now?
Got it.
Same thing for this. You want somebody who specializes in tenant work, and then you want to ask them questions like, how much of your work is healthcare? And you can
Hmm.
ask them, how many dentists are you going to represent this year? How many
Hmm.
dentists does your firm represent?
And if
Those
they
are all.
represent physicians too, is that kind of comparable, or should it
Yeah,
just be
same thing.
dentists?
Anything
Okay.
under healthcare, you're good to
Okay.
go.
Okay.
It's kind of like this. And again, I'm not trying to poke anyone right now, but I would, again, we're talking about orthodontics as a primary. I know you talk to a lot of other people as well too, but if you're going to ask someone, if you talk to an orthodontist that has a couple thousand patients they're treating for orthodontia right now,
Hmm.
versus let's say maybe a general dentist does an Invisalign case once or twice a year, which person do you think has a superior skill set or solution?
Right.
And
Right.
so now, if you're in a town and there's no orthodontist and it's not convenient to drive 2 hours to get to one, and your general dentist has a competency, maybe that's the right solution for you. If
Hmm.
you're in a town and you have no one to choose from besides that, then maybe somebody who does a little bit of healthcare better than none. But in most major markets, you can find people that are tenant only, and you can find people that specialize in healthcare.
Okay. So those two things off the rip, you want tenant only and healthcare. That's just throw the others out that don't check those boxes.
Correct. And
Okay.
then the next question, which is kind of the catch-all, is what would be your game plan, like in a nice way, like what would be your game plan or strategy to help me capitalize on my transaction of blank? I want to
Love
buy
it.
a building,
Yep.
I want to renew my lease, and then
Yep.
you're going to know real quickly whether this person is an expert or whether they're just kind of, jack of all trades.
Hmm.
I mean, prior to me specializing in healthcare, I was a jack of all trades, and
Hmm.
I knew enough to get deals done in certain areas. But I mean, I would do a food processing facility, and then I'd do a car dealership, and then I would do a
Hmm.
dental deal, and I could do all of them better than most people. But then I became an expert, and so if you can find the true expert, that's what
Hmm.
you're looking for.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, sorry. So I interrupted you on that. You were going on the path of, which led to my second question, was when you are taking all these different properties, sort of distilling and funneling it down from 20 or 30 to a few, and then pulling those levers of what all those moving pieces are. How involved is the doctor in that process, and how much of that is it something where the broker is getting those answers and then should be reporting right back to the doctor on that to make decisions? Is it where the information is coming to the doctor and they have to just kind of filter it all? If you could just talk about what that looks like a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the information is going to be funneling through the broker. So the broker is going to be negotiating directly with the listing agent or the landlord directly. And then a good broker, and by the way, we use the terms broker, agent. Again, every state's got different terminology, but just for the audience, broker, agent. Some people call them realtors, although that's actually a designation. That's actually not the correct title. But anyways, we're talking about the advisor for the doctor.
Okay.
So the information is coming to the advisor, and then a good advisor will pull the information together, and then they will outline it like in a lease comparison spreadsheet or a purchase versus lease analysis.
Okay.
And then the doctor always has the final say. Like nobody should be asking for things on behalf of the doctor without the doctor signing off on it. So sometimes people will think, well, I don't want to lose control. You're not losing control. It's no
Hmm.
different than a patient. Again, you sit down with them, listen, we can do traditional braces, or we can do like an Invisalign concept, or we can do the, I mean, the patient chooses
Hmm. Yep.
the
Great
provider
analogy.
or
Yep.
advisor says, here's your options. And then they're going to tell the person, here's the pros and cons. Here's what I would do if I were you. And that's what you're looking for. So
Hmm.
you submit offers. Let's say that 3 are leases, 1's a purchase. They come back and you say, Doc, here's where the first round of negotiations came back at. Very pleased with this, this, and this. I do think we can push harder here and we can push a lot harder here. Or this topic is off limits because of this reason right here. They're
Okay.
not gonna they'll do an exclusive for orthodontics, but they're not going to do an exclusive for pediatric or whatever because of X. And so we can't push harder there, but we can push here, here, and here. And then with the approval of the client, the doctor, then you go back and you hit them for a second round. And then you leverage one landlord against the other. So listen, we like this property a lot,
Hmm.
but you guys are offering literally half of the building allowance that we're seeing at your 2 top competitors here. So even though my client likes your property a lot, it's in their top 2 or 3. You're going to force them to come out of pocket more than they have the ability in their loan balance. And so we
Hmm.
can't do your deal even if we wanted, as an example. And so you're leveraging landlords against each other. And again, these landlords are big boys and big girls.
Hmm.
And if they don't want the deal, they won't take the deal. So
Hmm.
we're not forcing anyone's hand. We're not, causing them to do a deal and then they're going to get foreclosed. If it doesn't make sense, they're going to say no. But here's the summary of negotiations for almost anything you're going to ever negotiate. This is how it works. Unless there is a fear of loss or a pressure or pain point, people don't move beyond what they think they have to move.
Hmm.
Simple as that. If you think you got a buyer at 1.3 for your house, you're not going to sell it for 1.2. You're going to wait and say, no, I don't have to. If
Hmm.
you have a fear of loss, if you think there's no other buyers out there, if you have a pressure point of I need to sell my house because I have to move or whatever it might be, then
Hmm.
that pressure, that fear, or the motivation causes you to do things and get more aggressive. It works the same way.
Hmm.
If a landlord's had a space sit vacant for 2 years and they think this is the best deal they've seen, they'll push harder for the deal.
Yep.
If they see your deal being a 10-year deal and they realize that dental as an industry carries less than a 1% default rate in leases,
And is that
and
true?
you can, what's that?
Is that a fact?
That's a fact. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a fact. Well, let me say this one. That is the numbers that we track from like the top 6 or 7 banks that specialize in dental lending across the country.
Okay.
So you go through these concepts, and again, we're mixing a lot of different ingredients in this recipe right now. But
Mm-hmm.
you're leveraging landlords, and so they come back and they bring revised terms, better terms. You present those again. Well, after you've done that with a doctor, and you say to the doctor, "Listen, I started with 20 properties. You saw the top 7.
Mm-hmm.
We picked the top 3 or 4, and we've now gone 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation." The doctor can eliminate several questions from their mind. Number one, is there any other properties I should look at? The answer is no. We've looked at all the top options.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, are we leaving money on the table? No, we've gone 3, 4 rounds of negotiation, and I can tell you unequivocally, we pushed as hard as we can push. We've scraped the bottom of the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And so, would you move forward to this property? Yes, because of all the things that we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to this place where nobody wants to do a deal for 10 years or buy $1 million property. And then the next day after they sign a lease or they close saying, why didn't I look at more properties?
Yep.
Why didn't I negotiate harder?
Yep.
Did I have the best advisor? Like you check every one of those boxes, and then you have the assurance or the peace of mind to say, this is the best property for me. Doesn't matter what's going on in Tulsa. Doesn't matter what's going on in Spokane, Washington. Like in my market, I saw the best properties. I saw lease. I saw purchase. I saw retail. I saw office. And this is the place that I want to have. This is where I want to have my flag flying for the next 20 years or however long I'm here.
Yep.
And I feel convinced that I did the best I could with what I had.
And that peace of mind is
priceless.
Yes, that peace of mind is huge, because so often, like in our online study groups and in conversations at meetings, people are comparing, and I'm so glad you said that about different regions, because geographically, I don't have to tell clearly you this, but it varies so much, and people will say, "Oh, I got this finish out allowance," or "I'm doing this per square foot," or my triple net is this, and these are my lease terms, and someone's comparing, and they're in totally different states and totally different markets, and it makes one person feel like they got a bad deal, and maybe one feel like they got a good deal. I don't know, but ultimately, what you're saying is by having a broker representative who knows the market and knows the game, fair enough, because it's a negotiation, it is a game. They can rest assured that that's also going to help give them peace of mind, in addition to to the financial aspect and the X's and O's of the dollars and cents of this, there is an emotional part of this. I had my personal advisor, financial advisor on a few months back, and we talked a lot about the emotional side of this. And anytime you deal with anything financial, whether it's investment, which or just renting or leasing a space or purchasing a building or saving for retirement, there's an emotional component. So what you're saying, and I think it's a great thing to highlight, is it lets you put your head on the pillow at night a little more confident that what you're paying is the best, most fair rate. Because nobody wants to be taken. No one wants to get screwed over and be paying more than they had to pay or get less finish out allowance than they could have gotten. So that's another point that I'm glad you brought up, that some of this is not necessarily something you're gonna see line item on a spreadsheet, and that's the emotional component that it was the best you could do.
Absolutely. And coming from the landlord side, we'd see people show up, they'd say, well, what can you do? And then they'd say, well, can you do this? And we would just say, no, the landlord doesn't typically do this. And they would accept that. And it was just the landlord saying no. Or you hear landlords, one of my favorite lines, the landlords say, well, we have a policy, we don't do that. I mean, this is like you saying, well, I have a policy that I don't pay taxes, or this is like me saying I have a policy I don't follow the speed limit. Or I mean, again, like you can say I have a policy, like this is like Congress didn't meet and voted on this, and then the president signed it into. I mean, like it's hilarious because people will say things, oh, we don't do that, or we have a policy, and then people will just be like, oh shoot, well we asked. And again, if you have an advisor, they'll tell you when that's, hey, they're not going to budge in this one, here's why. Or they'll say, this property doesn't have enough parking for your use, there's only one space left and they're already at parking, they truly can't do your deal. Or it's like, no, I don't care if they said we don't give free rent on a lease renewal. Of course they give free rent on a lease renewal. Like, do you think if they were talking to Starbucks right now that they would be brazen enough to say we don't get, I mean, because Starbucks would slap them in the face and say, this is the 1700th lease we've done, and it's already March right now this year.
I don't think that would be their I don't think that would be their policy with Starbucks.
Yeah, no, and so you hear these things, and again, it's like anything else. It sounds confusing. It's no different than when a patient is sitting in a chair and the dentist starts like naming the tooth based upon this, or they start using dental terminology. And I'm not going to embarrass myself and say the wrong one, but I was at the dentist last week and they're poking teeth and they're saying, well, this one, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I've never even heard that term before. And I've been a dentist my entire life. And so it's the same thing, and they could literally make up anything they want and you don't know what's going on. But if you had another dentist in the room that was your representative, they would say, hey, Colin, that's not what's going on with your teeth. And that's what you're looking for. And they're, this is a good one too. People say, well, I want to make sure I can trust the person because at the end of the day, they're getting paid to do a deal. Isn't that not the case with every dentist or every orthodontist? Are they not getting paid to do your teeth and to put braces on you? I mean, are they not getting paid? Couldn't they charge more if they keep the braces on for 2 years versus 8 months? I mean, like there has to be a level of trust in any relationship. And so there's bad real estate brokers out there, no question. There's also really bad dentists out there, and there's bad teachers and there's bad attorneys and so forth. And so you find someone you trust, that's key. But the beauty and what I love about what we just explained is the due diligence process and the going 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation. That is the interpretation for the doctor. Don't just take my word. This is 3 or 4 landlords coming back 3 or 4 times. And you told me, Mike, as the client, you told me to push harder here, do this. You are in control. And so not only do you have a relationship of trust with your agent or broker, but they also prove it to you. It's like them taking down the x-ray and bringing another dentist in the room and saying, now tell me, to their dentist, is this not what's going on? And they say, listen, Colin, as a patient, this is what's going on. It's a check and balance. And that's why even when a client comes to us and says, I only want that property, that's the only one I'm going for, we'll say, great, we'll go for that property. We're going for 3 or 4 other ones on the side. And they'll say, well, don't waste your time. And I'll say, it's not a waste of my time. It's an investment time, because the last thing I'm going to have you do is sign a deal and then come back to me a month later and say, I should have looked at more properties. Like, I don't get that phone call. We don't get fired from clients hardly ever. And we don't hardly ever get that phone call that says, what if, or why didn't we? Because we do the best we can up front to make sure they don't second guess it once it's done.
No, that's great. How do you advise them when they come to you, a question you probably get asked all the time and for your input on, and I know we're not giving specific advice to specific people here, but generally speaking, how do you help them navigate the buy versus lease situation? Because that is something that again, you alluded to this. And you said you did, and myself included. I knew I wanted to own. I wanted the tax advantages that came with that. I wanted a property. Ideally, I was able to get one that had apartment buildings in it as well. So that was part of my vision. But it also comes with a lot of work. And we were talking just when we first hopped on, before we started the episode, that you just got dumped on with a few feet of snow out in Colorado. And I brought me back to when I was in upstate New York practicing, and we would have those times. And when you get hit with that snow, there's a lot of responsibility on the building you own to manage that and maintain that, and not just clear it initially, but then as it melts and the roof and all that. So how do you advise people? Are there general rules that you try to help people navigate or understand, or is it really just something they just have to kind of look at their own individual financial situation and make a determination from there? Do you have questions about a clinical case, or maybe a challenging practice management issue? Or maybe you're a new doc who's starting a practice and doesn't know where to turn for advice. Doc's private one-on-one coaching platform is here to help you succeed in all these areas and more. Just go to theorthocoach.com and select coaching from the menu to enroll. And now back to today's podcast.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, everything you just said is part of the process. It is both of those. So we have a couple criteria that we talk about. So the first one we talk about is, number one, is there even an option for you to purchase? And that might seem foreign because everyone's thinking residential. Well, there's always a house to buy. There's not always a commercial property to buy. Like it's very common. There's not. And so, like, if you said to me, hey, I want to buy a 3,000 square foot office condo, there might not be any office condos. And so you might be defaulted to buying a standalone building, and the only building available might be a 20,000 square foot office building, or like a 5-unit retail strip center, and you might not have $6 million to do that, or whatever the number is. So number one is there any available properties, or are there any available properties that will fit your criteria, your requirement? That's question number one. Number two, it gets into, is the quality of property for sale comparable or better than your options to lease? And again, I've had it before where a client says, I want to own, and there are properties for sale, but they're functionally obsolete. They have 8-foot tall ceilings, and the doors are skinny, and the building looks like it's not great, or the neighboring tenants are not great. It's like, listen, you can own and you can pick up the principal pay down, the tax deductions, which are fantastic. But if this is a location that's going to cost you $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month in revenue, because it's such a worse location, and your staff's not going to be as happy coming here, and your patients aren't going to refer you at the same level, because even if you're an amazing provider, they're not going to be as comfortable telling their friends to come to your office because it's not that great, compared to this Class A option to lease on the corner of Main and Main with 50,000 cars a day going by it. Again, is the principal pay down and deductions worth it? So if the property is comparable or better, then you're down to the economics. And then the economics will tell you the story quickly. Number one, can you afford the down payment? The beauty of being a mainstream healthcare provider, whether it's dental, medical, vet, optometry, et cetera, versus maybe like a med spa it might be owned by a physician, but it could be healthcare related. If you are a true medical provider with the credentials, you can oftentimes get financing for 10% down versus 20 or 30. And there's even some lenders that will give you 100% financing. Like they'll say, hey, you need 10% down. We'll actually give you the 10% down to finish the loan. So question
is it harder now? Is it, before you go to the next, is it, I've heard, I don't know, because I haven't done this side in a while. Is it a lot harder, more difficult to get dental financing now than it was? Has that industry changed recently, or is it still something that's a fair option for people?
It's not harder, in my personal opinion. Okay. And somebody might, hear this and say, well, I applied for a loan and I got denied, and I whatever. They told me it was 2 years ago, but that's not our experience. I mean, we have a couple thousand dentists that we're doing work for nationally, and that's just not our experience right now.
And do you help put people in touch with the people who can do the financing as well? Do you have connections with those people to say, hey,
we do.
This is a group of banks? Okay, awesome.
Sorry. And it depends on the transaction. If they said, hey, listen, I'm going to go buy a $6 million property and I have very little cash, but I have a very solid practice, that's going to open the door to 1 or 2 lenders that specialize in those types of loans. Okay. Some lenders are better on startups than others. Some lenders are better with real estate. Some lenders have better programs with the SBA and they're more competitive than other lenders. Like
Mm-hmm.
two lenders might offer an SBA program, but one might be much better at it.
Interesting. Okay.
And so my take is, you can still get 100% financing today for certain healthcare providers on certain transactions.
Okay.
But
Great.
let's just say it was a 10% down payment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's a $5 million building, you might not have $500,000 to put into the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So the next set of questions are, do you have the down payment? Number one. And then if you clear that hurdle, what does the monthly cash flow look like for your practice?
Mm-hmm.
And here's where we tell the clients, look, you're going to probably pay more for a purchase than a lease. I mean, if the purchase price, as far as like buying a building and building it out, if your mortgage is the same or less than a lease, that's a no-brainer if you met the other two criteria.
Right.
I
If you
mean,
met the other two,
if you can own for the same or less, and in 20 years of leasing, you walk away from the real estate side of it with intangible value of build out when you sell your practice, but nothing from the landlord. And where you own, you walk away in 20 years and that asset's paid off and it's maybe worth $1.5 million, 2 million. Like that's a no-brainer. Like that's super simple. The questions come in, well, what happens if it costs me, $6,000 to lease and it's $12,000 to own? That's where then you need to go to the next level of, well, what's the principal pay down? Because let's say every month you cut a check for $12,000, if $3,000 is principal, all you're doing is putting money into what I call a forced savings account. Really, it wasn't 12,000, it was 9,000, and you put 3,000 into a savings account that you're going to get that money back out in the future when you sell that property. Other concepts are, all right, well, what does it look like after tax deductions and depreciation? Because as you alluded to, you pick up some very healthy deductions and some very healthy tax savings when you own. And so you could have a scenario where it's $12,000 to own, $6,000 to lease, but after principal pay down and after bonus depreciation and maybe a cost segregation study and other things, you get to the place where maybe it's only costs $1,500 a month more to own than lease because you're going to pay more money to a lender, but less money to the federal government. And so you could have a scenario where all of a sudden that delta of 6,000, now that delta comes down and it's maybe $1,500 a month. Again, that's a no-brainer if you can afford the payment up front each month. So
and have the cash flow. Yep. Okay.
So basically, you get into the scenario of, are there any properties available that meet your criteria? Are they legitimate properties, not any property, but true properties that you see yourself practicing in for the next 10, 20 years? And then you get into the economics, and there's a couple different, rounds that you go through, but it becomes very, very simple and very, very easy to understand quickly. This either is a great option and it makes sense or it doesn't. And then you can get into other things like, are you only going to practice for 2 or 3 years? Do you want to deal with it? And then you get some people that just say, listen, Colin, honestly, the money doesn't matter to me. I don't want to deal with it. Like whatever it might be. I've got more than I can handle. I don't want to deal with, hiring an HVAC contractor for the AC unit. I don't want to deal with the snow removal. And even though I'm leaving money on the table and there's a great option, I don't care. Like my time's worth more. And in that case, we try to explain what is actually involved. And are you sure that you can't dedicate a little bit of time to this for the benefit? But, the doctors, they're the one driving, the advisor's navigating, they're riding shotgun, navigating, telling them where to turn and what to do and what they would do. But at the end of the day, the doctor has the final say.
And it's, as you're saying that, there's so many guests I have on in so many different capacities and arenas. It comes down to vision. And the person, in this case, the purchaser doctor, understanding the vision of what they want. Like you said, some people come to you, they say, God, I just don't want the headache. Right. But understanding that and knowing what you want, not just now and what looks good and shiny and you alluded to as well, sell this in 10 or 20 years, or just walk away in 10 years. Or maybe you want to sell your practice in 5, 7 years and you just want to go in and you're maximizing a later stage of your career and you just need some upgrades, or you're off something happened in your current office space. And so, but knowing your vision, everyone tries to paint it with this broad brush to say that everyone should do this, or you should buy or lease or rent and whatever, sublet, whatever it is. But again, it comes down to understand what you want and what works best for you and your practice and your family and your finances. And yeah, that doesn't mean that you have to go 100% all in. I'm definitely going to buy, or I'm definitely going to lease, but it starts to narrow your choices down a little bit. And then when you're presented with those options that someone like yourselves brings to them, it's much easier to then say, oh, that fits within my vision. but that doesn't. So you can make that decision a little more clearly.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give an analogy. You can call it cheesy if you want to, but you just said the word fit. So I have a clothing brand that I love. Like it's a really beautiful brand. It feels great. I am a medium in polo. I am a large in a quarter zip, and I'm an extra large in a vest. And so, like, and you say, what's that have to do with real estate? You got to go out there and kick tires and look at properties and negotiate with people and look at the numbers, because it's not one size fits all. And you think you're a medium, and all of a sudden you put on another property. You're like, man, this fits me 10 times better than that one. This is so much of a better deal economically. I'm going to say 400,000 compared to that. And you can't go in there and just predetermine what you think you should do because someone told you they did that, or you think this is what's best for you. You really need to get out there, look at it, touch the property, smell the property, stand in the property, look at the numbers, let your advisor help you. And at the end of the day, like, you're going to know really quickly and unequivocally towards the end of that process which property is the right one for you. And if you're fortunate enough to have two that are neck and neck and they're both so competitive that you're having a hard time choosing, that's a great place to be. But typically one's gonna surface, and you're gonna say, that's the property I want. And then a lot of times too, you might say, look, this property's gonna cost me $400,000 more than that one, but it's worth it to me. And that's great. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, not everyone's driving a $20,000 car, and yet you can go buy a car for $20,000, but you say, hey, it's worth it to me to have a nicer car or a better experience, etc. I'm willing to pay money or pay a premium, and you can get somewhere faster flying in a jet than you can going Greyhound, but you determine it's worth more money to you to do the one versus the other. Is same with real estate. The beauty is, if you're going to pay more for a property, you just want to know that you made an intelligent decision.
Right.
And
right. That's
that's
exactly
the
exactly. You said it, took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say the key is knowing that that driving that nicer car is part of your vision, and that's important to you, and not just throwing that money at it because, oh, this is something I think maybe I should do, or my friend has one, right? But if that's something that you value, great. As long as the numbers add up and you can do it. Even the fit of the clothes. What do you want the clothes to look like on you? Is that important to you? How do you want them to fit? Someone could, if it doesn't matter what you look like, then you're going to be a little more willing to try it. But you might realize that that's not in once you wear it out, you might have some regret. But if you know ahead of time, this is what I want to look like, this is what I want it to fit like, then you're open to trying on different clothes, so to speak, and you can make one fit within your vision. And I think so often people don't have that even shorter long-term vision of kind of where they see themselves. So they I think you get much more emotional about short-term decisions when you don't have a bigger picture vision. And I'm sure you see that all the time. And so before we talk about some of the sort of things to be wary of in a lease and some more specifics on that side, how do you deal with the emotional side that comes up? How do you and your team handle that side of things with the doctor, the purchaser being emotional?
That's a great question. So we'll start almost every transaction and we'll tell the doctor a couple of things. Number one, anytime you're spending $1 million or $2 million, there's going to be some emotion tied to it. And so even though this is a business-driven process and eventually a business-driven choice, if you go buy a $2 million building or you sign $1 million lease, but you put $1 million into it between equipment and technology, like, don't be surprised if some emotions come out.
Yep.
Don't be surprised if you get cold feet or a little apprehensive in the process. Like, it's not every day that you spend $2 million on something. And this is typically a multi-million-dollar transaction between the purchase price or the lease value, and then you factor in all the other costs. So that's part of it. The next thing we'll tell people is, listen, the landlord does not work for you, and they do not care about you. And they will put you in front of the bus and drive over you and back it up and drive over you again. So just realize, they are about their business and they're about their finances. So don't expect them to do the right thing. Don't expect them to do you any favors. We have to have a strategy. We have to go in there with posture. It's just like if someone was suing you. And again, it's not quite that aggressive, but they're going to take you for as much as they can get the judge to say yes to, or as much as they can get you to agree to. So just realize it's a multi-million-dollar deal. There's sophisticated parties. And even if you're dealing with, like, let's say a mom and pop landlord, they're still not stupid. Like, they want their money. Like, they want the best return. So, and then other thing we tell them too is, look, any transaction that involves construction, you're going to have a problem. So don't go in there. This is like someone getting married saying that we're in love, we're never going to have an argument. Like, it's not going to happen. You're going to have some challenges. You're going to have some tough times. So if you go in there knowing that it's not a matter of when a problem's going to come up, it's a matter of who's on my team to help me solve it. It's a completely different way of looking at
I
it.
like
So
that. Yeah.
you go into the transaction knowing the landlord is probably going to be difficult to deal with. When you get a lease agreement, it's going to be 80 pages. It's going to be entirely in the landlord's favor. You're going to be able to change some, but not very much in it. Just understand that. When you sign up with a contractor, they're going to miss deadlines. They're going to have delays. They're going to mess up. They're going to chip a cabinet. They're going to mess. I mean, like you're going to have to just work with them to fix things. And then when you get ready to open, there's still going to be a punch list of things that weren't done right. Like it's all part of the process. So if you go in there realizing, hey, listen, not being a pessimist and not, always looking around every corner trying to find like the guy's going to jump out and get you, but just go in there eyes wide open saying, look, problems are going to come up. It might get emotional. What it comes down to is who's on my team to help me solve the problems and to help navigate. And do I trust them? And if you can say, yes, I do, that's going to make the process go so much better for you. And at the end of the day, you're not looking for a perfect process. You're looking for the best outcome in light of the challenges or the things that are going to pop up in the deal.
And what challenges in a lease do you see most commonly? You're talking about that lease document, whether you can change or not change, but what are some of the things that are in a lease that are maybe red flags, or things that you see in a lease that maybe they're a good sign or a bad sign? And what are those things that you tend to be able to negotiate more, and what are the things that you just really can't do much about? Have you heard about the Doc community on Facebook? It's where you can get access to more great content, including case reviews, select clips from CE courses and podcasts, literature reviews, and exclusive promotions and discounts off Doc educational materials. Just go to Facebook and search for the Doc community and submit a request to join the group. And now back to the podcast.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start out, I'm going to give a legal disclaimer, tongue in cheek, but also seriously. No matter how good your real estate broker is, you need an expert real estate attorney to handle that process. And your broker will work with the attorney, but the brokers can't practice law. So you need to get a real estate attorney. And it's not either or. Just like you don't want a real estate attorney negotiating your deal with a landlord, you don't want a real estate broker negotiating a lease with an attorney. So it's both people in the process, not one or the other. But once you get into that lease, obviously you need to make sure that the things your broker negotiated for you actually makes it into the lease, because sometimes it doesn't. Like they'll write things in a way that you think you got what you asked for, and they'll write it in a way that they can try not to give you what they told you they'd give you. And that happens all the time, unfortunately. You get into concepts like, what's the language with your exclusive use? Is it truly exclusive, or did they give themselves a loophole there? You get into concepts, what happens if you want to sell your practice? Well, some leases contain a sublease and assignability clause, but just having that clause doesn't win the day, because you might have a clause in there that says you can assign the lease, but only if they hit criteria that are nearly impossible or not going to happen unless your buyer is like a DSO or someone that smokes you financially. But I'll give you an example. A lot of leases will say, you can assign the lease, but it doesn't tell you that you'll be removed as a guarantor. Like, well, what did that do for me? It allowed someone else, it allowed the landlord to bring in another party. Now they have two personal guarantees, not one. Like that's like selling a house and you guaranteeing the mortgage for the person that bought your house. And again, the irony is a lot of times you can't step foot in that office because you don't own it anymore, and you can't contact the patient because of a non-compete or a sale agreement. So anyways, just having an assignability clause doesn't mean that you're in good shape. You could be in just as bad a shape. And there's ways to get around that. There are ways to make the language favorable for you. What happens if there's a holdover and you don't sign a new lease, but you don't get out? Is it at 200% of your rent they can charge you for premium, or is that 150 or 125? Those are things that are negotiable. Who's taking care of the HVAC, and who's taking care of janitorial, who's taking care of utilities? Can the landlord put a brand new roof on and charge you your proportionate share in year one or over the useful life of your lease? They shouldn't be able to put in capital improvements. They should be able to do maintenance, but not capital improvements. And so that's kind of one of those hidden areas where landlords will finance new parking lots, new roofs, new HVAC, and their tenants will pay for it. And some of that stuff isn't even legal how they do it, but they'll do it anyways. And if you don't realize what's happening, you can fall prey to that. So almost every deal we do, I mean, we insist the clients have, let me start over. We insist the clients have an attorney in every deal we do. In almost every deal we do, the client will say, well, I do have a friend who's an attorney. And we'll say, okay, that's like me saying my son needs braces. And I'll say, well, I have a friend who's a chiropractor. He's a doctor. It's like, just because you're an attorney, just because you're a doctor, doesn't mean that you're specialized. So get a good real estate attorney. They cost you less money because they'll get through at least 3
They're
times as
reasonable.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've done many transactions, real estate transactions. The real estate attorneys are very reasonable, I find, in terms of what the value they offer and the money they save you. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And they're not going to waste their time trying to make you feel like they're a good attorney by marking up a document. We call it redlining a document, putting red ink in the document. They're not going to waste their time marking up a document with things they know are going to get declined, because a good real estate attorney says, listen, I'm not going to overreach in areas where I know the landlord's going to slap my hand and say, what are you doing? And then have that impact the way they respond to me in an area that I should have had them say yes to. And so this is really simple. Again, I like to use analogies. If someone was selling their house for $1 million and you offered them $300,000, are they going to respect you for that offer and say, wow, what a savvy offer? Or are they going to say, who is this idiot and why are they doing this? It's the same thing. If you hire an attorney and they start asking for things in that lease that are completely unreasonable, that no landlord's ever going to agree to, it just makes the other areas that are reasonable for the attorney to ask for less likely to be accommodated. And so there is an overreach. And I love to address this statement, because people will say things like, well, you never know if you don't ask. And that is true in a select area of life. It is completely false in other areas. And so again, certain areas, like, is the property for sale? That's a great time to say you never know if you don't ask. If you ask the landlord for certain things that are unreasonable, or you press beyond the measure, you will lose credibility. You will lose the willingness to even work with you. And I've had landlords before that get comments back from an attorney, and I've had landlords truthfully say, we will not work with this person. There's no way we're going to get into a business relationship with you if you're asking for this stuff already. And I've had landlords kill deals, and we even tried to like resuscitate the deal and they wouldn't do it. Like, they're like, nope, we're not going there. And so you do have to be careful of things you ask for, and you have to be tactful in how you ask for them. And again, I joke about, certain things as far as how you ask, but I mean, you can ask people for things and you can kill a relationship like that by asking for something that's not fair, that's not right, it's not equitable. And so you do have to be careful how you ask for things. It's okay to ask, but you have to be careful how you do it, and you don't want to press beyond the measure.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. What does your firm really offer? We've talked about the general concept, but specifically, can you give me some specific examples of where you have really helped shift the balance of the way negotiations were going, maybe save them from a very significant exposure they would have had, and really talk about 1 or 2 examples that your firm was able to have a really profound impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk in generalities, and I'll give a couple stories, but I mean, overall, there's a huge time savings if a dentist, orthodontist, doctor is not spending time becoming a market expert, not investing what is the average time frame to get a deal done, which is 40 to 50 hours of their time. And instead it's an hour and a half, 2 hours on a tour, and then in 20 minutes here on a call, 20 minutes there. If you put a couple hours into a deal versus 40 or 50, I mean, that's a significant time savings. There's also a significant emotional and just mental savings, not stressing over things that you're not qualified to stress over, and not getting taken advantage of. That's peace of mind, that's value, et cetera. But economically, the vast majority of deals that we're involved with, there's a couple $100,000 that's on the line in the transaction. And this is where people, don't do the math. They think there's like an MSRP on every deal. It's like, hey, I'm going to go buy, a GMC Sierra Denali pickup truck. And I know that some dealers might mark it up a little bit, but as a whole, I'm going to get it within $1,000 or $2,000. There's no MSRP on real estate. Okay. It's the most the landlord can charge you on the rate, and the least they can give you in concessions. That's their definition of a market deal. And that's a true quote from me. I was talking to a landlord, and it was one of those really high price deals. And I said, are you serious right now? I said, this is a super, super egregious deal. And he goes, Colin, the definition of a market lease rate is the most they're willing to pay. So you get a couple $100,000 in the line between lease rates, free rent allowances, build out allowances, annual increases, who pays for what in the event of maintenance, repair, capital improvements. And again, you're in 3,000 square feet. And if you're overpaying by $3 a foot, that's $90,000 over a 10-year deal.
Right.
If your annual increase is at 4 versus 3, here comes another $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 during the term of the lease. If you get 2 months of free rent versus 4, there's another $20,000, $30,000. I mean, you can start to see how these numbers accumulate and add up. So, and if you overpay by 300 grand in a lease that you could have avoided if you were properly represented, you didn't make a $300,000 mistake. That might be $900,000 of production to have the money left over after you pay tax on it,
right,
after you do all the other things that you do.
Well, you have your overhead, you have just to produce it, let alone you pay your overhead on that amount and then tax. And then, I mean, it can shift the scale very quickly when you're talking numbers that size.
Absolutely. You get into lease or loans. Like let's say you could have got an extra $50,000 in building allowance, which that's a very common number to leave on the table for a building allowance. Well, now you're paying 7% interest over 10, 12, 15 years.
Yeah.
And so again, we're not trying to make more out of this than it actually is, but it's one of those scenarios, to use a dental analogy, you need a filling and you don't pay attention to it. And all of a sudden now you need a root canal, and then you needed a crown, and now you need an implant, and now you need a bone graft. And it's like you can do things one way that's the best way to do it, or you can ignore it or pretend like it's not there, or just guess your way through it. And then you can end up with repercussions. The challenge for us, like in real estate, in these transactions, it's not going to wake you up in the middle of the night because you're not going to be able to sleep because the tooth hurts so bad. You're going to just cut a check every month to the landlord thinking that you're fine. And when we do a lease review for you, we're going to say you overpaid in this lease by 300 grand, or you missed 100 grand here, or whatever. And again, the world's not going to end. You're not going to lose your practice over it. So it's not of that level of drama, but it's one of those things where you want to do the best you can with what you have. You want to capitalize and any opportunity you can, to the point where you're not taking advantage of people, you're doing it equitably with integrity. But if you can save 300 grand on a deal, if you can spend 5 hours on it versus 50, if you can sleep every night knowing that you did the best you could with what you had and have that peace of mind, that's the offer. So
yeah, I completely agree. And how do you guys just get paid on a commission of the percent of sale or lease or the contract? How is that structured for the compensation of your firm?
Yeah, so we get paid as a percentage of the deal in the vast majority of scenarios. I would say 99 out of 100 deals, that's how it works. And commercial real estate works very similarly to residential real estate. If you've ever purchased a house and you had an agent that helped you buy it, they took half the commission from the listing agent. And if you would have shown up without an agent, that listing agent would have gotten a double commission. And that's the same way in commercial. If you show up without a broker in a commercial transaction, one of two things are going to happen. Listing agent will get a double commission, which they will be more than happy to take twice the money to the bank that they thought they were going to. They'll be gracious to you. They'll make you think that they work for you when they don't. And then they'll take they'll get a bonus paycheck of twice what they should have gotten if you had an agent, or the landlord just keeps the money. And so I'll give another just kind of pro tip here. What do you think a landlord's going to tell an unrepresented tenant, or what do you think a listing agent's going to tell an unrepresented tenant who shows up without a broker? They will say to them, well, if you don't use a broker, we'll give you a better deal. And again, it's like, I'll give you the analogy. Again, here it comes. It's 25 cents each, or if you want to buy in bulk, we'll sell it to you for 3 for $1. And you hear 3 for $1, I'm getting a discount. And it's like, no, dude, stop.
No, do the math.
Yeah, do the math. When they tell you don't use a broker, why are they telling you that? If it was the same deal, like just think about it. If it was the same deal and the landlord was going to spend the exact same amount of money, they would say, well, I want a broker. I don't want to have to educate a tenant. I don't want to have to deal with their attorney. I want the broker to deal with. I mean, they're telling you that because they know they're going to save or make a couple $100,000 extra. And so what they're saying, it's like an attorney saying, listen, I'm about to sue you, but don't hire an attorney. Just talk to me and I'll take care of you. You would say that's crazy. It's the same thing, but doctors will hear that
and they'll say, oh, wow, I'm going to save money. This sounds great. Like when someone says, I will help you save money, and they have a legal obligation to negotiate against you and to help you lose as much money as possible, you should probably be aware that was not a true statement.
And is it off of the percentage of the whole lease? How it goes with a house, obviously in residential, if you're purchasing a building, it's obviously a percentage of the sale price. How do they structure that or determine who gets what when it's a lease arrangement from a commission standpoint?
Yeah, it's a percentage of the total lease. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then again, questions come up. How do I know you're working for me? Well, number one, how do I know that I really need braces? How do I know that I need them for 24 months versus 8? How do I know? It's called integrity, and you can find it if you ask the right questions. But the other thing is, someone says, well, how do I know you're not going to drive up the price? Like, well, because I'm going to go 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation, and you're going to see how hard I push these guys. I'm going to push them as hard as I can without offending them or without pressing beyond the measure. But you're not going to wonder if I left money on the table. And if you think I do or am, then tell me to go harder, and I'll go harder, because you call the shots at the end of the day.
So you're building your firm and your business by doing the right thing for each individual client, which builds your brand, just like we do with our patients, right? You don't nickel and dime or take advantage of a patient on a particular case because it's penny wise and pound foolish. It's not the right strategy to have from a business standpoint, but also being unethical. But just from a pure business standpoint, why would you take advantage of any one individual to try to advance that case when now you're not going to get the potential for growing a reputation as being somebody who's honest and has integrity and does right by their, in your case, client, in our case, patient?
It's the exact thing. And we tell people that too. We say, listen, you'll never see a sign in front of a building with our name on it. Like, we can't rely upon somebody just driving by, randomly and picking up the phone. And then we try to sell that person. Like, the only way that we grow our business is by taking outstanding care of our clients, having excellent communication, superior processes, and delivering the best results. And if we do, you're going to want to tell several of your friends. And if we don't, then we're going to be out of business. It's the same thing as a doctor. Yeah. You can get an extra $500 on the patient and then have them walk away not satisfied, and you just lost out on 2 or 3 referrals at $8,000 each. Like, it's exactly what you just said. So I tell people that there are some really bad brokers out there. There's no question. And then there's this whole sea of really average brokers out there, no question. But there is a remnant of people that are really good. Mm-hmm. And that those numbers might seem weird to you. You might think that the majority are really good. I wish I could say that's the case. It's not. There's more average or bad than there are good, but there's some really great people out there. And, again, we have a company, we do things very specifically, but we'll tell people too, if it's not us, just make sure it's someone. Mm-hmm. It's no different than dental. Mm-hmm. Like, if this person's not going to be your dentist, they're not going to say, well, then don't have a dentist. They're going to say, please, like, for you, for your family, for your future health, like, please, if I'm not your dentist, please go somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's too important. It's the same thing for us. Like, don't fumble your way through a deal. Yes, you can sign a lease. Yes, you can say, send me a proposal. Yes, you can call and assign. But that's not going to get you the right results, and it's not going to be best for your practice, for your family, for your future, for your patients. Do what's best for all those people.
Awesome. Great stuff. I mean, that flew by. That's great. So interesting, so much information in just over an hour there. Really appreciate you sharing all that and your knowledge and expertise. How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you? And I can put this stuff in the show notes too.
Yeah, our website is the best way to get a hold of us. It's carr.us, carr.us. We have a tremendous resource tab as a reference if you do want to self-educate, glossary, FAQs, articles, blogs, etc. You can click to find an agent in your area if you want to start a conversation. Everything we do is free to our clients. So if you want a lease analysis, if you want a purchase versus lease comparison, even if you literally signed a lease last year and you have 9 years left, our team will still do a lease analysis to tell you how you did. Okay. And we'll put a placeholder in there to talk to you in 8 years when it's time to start the process. So we're just like a doctor would look at a patient, even if there was nothing there for 8 years, we'll do the same thing. Like, it's, hey, we're here to help. And if it's a benefit to you and you like the people, that we offer a great service. If not, you'll be more educated and intelligent than you were prior to the conversation, guaranteed.
That's awesome. Like I said, I'll put that link in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and helping the doctors who don't know a lot about this. As we said, they don't. And I think that we all struggle with, just like you said, someone going to a medical provider, dental provider, there's a trust element. It's hard. It's hard to know, is this person telling me the best thing for me? So finding somebody in this industry that you know, that you trust, and can be your advocate can really pay huge dividends. And I hope that is clear to all those who listen to this episode. So thanks again so much, Colin Carr. Really appreciate it and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Buck. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Take care. Thank you for watching this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. And remember to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content designed to help you succeed both personally and professionally. Just go to Facebook, search for the Doc community, and request admission into the group. You can also find Doc on Instagram at @theorthocoach. And always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.